Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar on dependent verification, how what you don't know can hurt you. I am happy to be joined today with Mark Helton, who is our dependent verification consultant here at Hodges-Mace. He is going to briefly cover the basics of dependent verification, why it's important for your business to be considering it today, not only as a tactic, but also as a strategy. And we are going to walk through some best practices, and we'll wrap up with a few success stories. So just a little bit for you about Mark. He has a 25-year history in HR management, so certainly qualified to talk about this, some things that he's encountered in his career. And then he spent the last 8 years actually working on dependent review process design, implementation, and management. And then he has some expertise in HR management, dependent verification strategy, dependent review project management, and dependent verification consulting. So we're very happy to have him here with us today. And with that, Mark, I am going to kick it over to you.
Thank you, Lee. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Talk a little bit about dependent verification reviews. And kind of to start off with, I'd like to note that I use the term review rather than the word audit. I always feel like audit sounds like the IRS is here to help you, and that's never a good thing. So let's talk a little bit about dependent verification and kind of what it is and what it's not. Starting off with what I think dependent verification really is it's really a truing up of who's on the health care plan and who should be on the health care plan, using the rules of the plan itself. I also believe that it's added peace of mind. The employees are obviously ensuring people they care about, and making sure that those people truly are covered is very important. If they're covering someone who's not eligible, then technically they don't have coverage, and that certainly could cause problems for them down the line. It's also a protection for the employees. A lot of people don't think about it this way, but for an employee that might be court-ordered, say, during a divorce, to cover a former spouse or former stepchildren, if they leave the individuals on the group health care plan, they technically do not have coverage. What may happen down the road is end up with some large claims that are then denied because that's no longer the employee's spouse. And those claims could come back to haunt the employee. They could also be in violation of the court orders. They could wind up with some legal issues on top of the financial situation they've gotten themselves into. So let's also talk about what a dependent verification review is not. And it really shouldn't be a fishing expedition or a witch hunt. It really is the opportunity to only find those individuals that shouldn't be on the plan and remove them. We shouldn't use the process as a punishment or an accusation. My experience is the majority of individuals that we find ineligible on a plan typically are unknowingly putting individuals on the plan and don't really understand that they're ineligible to begin with. And in no way do you want a project to take place that would exclude eligible dependents. And the way that might happen is if you don't use a long enough time frame, if you don't have a clear enough communication process, if you don't have it set up so that the employees can ask for assistance and get assistance, then individuals might be dropped from the plan and technically they are eligible. So being very careful to make sure you get it right, I think is very, very important. So why is it important to the employer? Well, the employer, of course, is acting as a steward of the money that go into the plan, not only their own money, but also the money paid by the employees. Costs this year can certainly affect costs for next year. So added claim costs this year for dependents that shouldn't be on the plan could increase costs for next year for both the employer and the employee. So making sure that the provider of healthcare coverage is actually a good steward of that money is very important. Let's talk a little bit about who should consider being a dependent verification reviewer, who should use one. My personal thought along that line is anytime the HR department doesn't know all of the employees, all of the dependents that should be on the health care plan. Once a company grows beyond a certain size, then you're probably in a position where you might want to do some sort of checking to make sure that only eligible individuals end up on the plan. What that number is, probably 100 to 200 dependents. Certainly gets to be very hard for an HR team to track. But in general, organizations that are 500 employees or more certainly are great candidates for a plan such as this. Not saying that under 500 you shouldn't consider it, but there may be some cost considerations for a group that's maybe 200 to 300 employees or dependents, and what they would pay versus what the cost savings would be. We find between 5 and 12% on average ineligible dependents on plans, regardless of size and regardless of industry. And what that typically calculates to is about $250,000 savings per 1,000 dependents on the plan. And I'm sure some of you are already clicking through your mind about what that might mean to your organization. But that's a sizable savings for an organization, especially if you have several thousand dependents on your plan. So how do the ineligibles end up on your plan in the first place? Let's talk through a couple of scenarios how that might happen. As I mentioned earlier, former spouses and former stepchildren happen to make up quite a few of those typically. Individuals who get divorced, they're ordered by the court to cover those people, and they don't know any different other than to leave them on the health care plan. If no one tells them otherwise, they just leave them on the plan. Also, you might have a scenario where an individual might be raising the child of their sister, and maybe that child's been living with them for the last 5 or 6 years. They even claim them on their tax return. But under most plan rules, that child's not eligible unless they become a legal guardian. So again, an individual on the plan, ineligible, and should be removed. We've also seen an uptick in the ineligible rate since healthcare reform was enacted. A lot of people believe that that would actually be reduced. However, I think just calling attention to the fact that everyone needs to be on some sort of health care and everybody trying to scramble around and find the best place to put someone might have caused more individuals to perhaps double up. Maybe I would put my children on my brother's plan. After all, my brother's already paying for a family plan and we have the same last name, so why not just put my children under his plan and I'll save some money on my side. So there are a number of scenarios that would result in ineligible dependents showing up. Let me talk a little bit about a real-life example and kind of give you an opportunity to participate a little bit with a quick poll. We had a client come to us and say, you know, we've already paid $250,000 on a claim. We turned that claim over to our reinsurance carrier, and they came back and denied the claim, saying that the dependent was actually not dependent of that the employee and should have been removed from the plan. So this employer, oil drilling company out of the Midwest, was stuck with a conundrum about how they should handle that. So let me ask you to participate with us for a minute and take a quick poll. I'll leave these pulling up on our screen. And let's just give you a couple scenarios and see which one you would pick. I'd be curious to see what your vote would be. Scenario A would be we go back and ask the employee for the money back, the $250,000 that we've already paid on claims. May have to sue them, may have to charge them with insurance fraud, but if we go back and ask for the money, chances are it might be difficult for us to collect. Scenario B, well, we've paid the $250,000. We're just going to walk away from it here and tell the employee, sorry, your dependent wasn't eligible. We've already paid $250,000, but we're going to walk away and the rest of it's on you. Now, certainly that could bring about a lawsuit, could cause some bad PR. There's some other items to think about when you are faced with that situation. And scenario number C, which could be, well, we've paid the $250,000. We're not going to get money back from the reinsurance carrier, so we'll just continue to pay on this claim and hope it doesn't go too high. Unknowing what the cap would be, you know, that could certainly be a sizable claim over and above the $250,000. So if you're sitting there looking at your screen, scratching your head and trying to decide what you might do, go ahead and take the poll and let us know what your thoughts are. We'll wait for just a second and see what kind of participation we have out there. So I'll leave looking at the numbers real quick. We'll take those. See what we're. So it looks like about 56% of you are picking B. Interesting. I think that could possibly wind up with some more headaches with maybe a PR problem or maybe even a lawsuit. This particular client chose C. They said they didn't want to get caught up in the PR nightmare, and they certainly didn't want to go to court. So they decided they'd just go ahead and take it on the chin and pay for this one. Of course, that opens up the door to the fact that someone else may have an ineligible dependent, may make claims, and they wind up with problems with other employees as well. So that's just a case that we actually ran into, and thought I'd share it with you and see what your thoughts were. So things to know and consider before you jump off and get ready to do a dependent review. When's the best time to conduct a dependent verification review? And my answer to that one is first quarter following annual enrollment. So if you have a fourth quarter annual enrollment, really the time is right now. January, February timeframe is awesome time to start that process. My second selection would probably be the second or third quarter after annual enrollment. Again, trying to do it when your HR team's workload might be reduced a little bit. Things are calmer. Nobody's running around trying to figure out what the next benefit change will be and who should or shouldn't be on the plan. And of course, my least favorite would be during annual enrollment. And there are a number of reasons to say not participate in a review during annual enrollment. First off, having been an HR person myself, I try to remember my HR brothers and sisters out there and try not to see them get overwhelmed with additional work during that time frame. But in reality, the target tends to move a lot during annual enrollment. You have people enrolled, disenrolled. You would also have different dates out there that could be confusing to the employee. They may see a date for the review and think that's their annual enrollment date and end up missing their enrollment because they were thinking of the wrong date. So just a confusing time for the employee, and I think it's just asking for trouble that you really don't need. So let's talk a little bit about timing. How long should a dependent review actually take? Well, I think you should plan enough time up front in the planning phase to make sure everything is set up properly. I typically look at a 4-week planning phase as being the very minimum. More time is better, but making sure that we work with the HR team to align the tone of the package of information we're going to send out to the employee, that the HR team is fully aware of how the process is going to work, that we even do some online training with the HR team and leadership in the organization so that they understand what's going to take place over the next few weeks. The actual review period, 6 weeks at least. I've participated in reviews that were shorter and longer, and there's inherent problems in both. If you go shorter, you may wind up having employees that are not able to gather the information that they need in time to complete the process. If there's a delay in the packet getting to their home because they moved and the packet was forwarded, could also set them back a little bit. If you stretch the review out too long, you tend to have employees say, oh, I'll take care of that next month. I've got plenty of time. So 6 weeks is what I would recommend. Typically at that point, we are sending out a letter. It's called an appeal letter, but it's really not an appeal per se. We use it as a grace period, and that grace period really is just an extension of the verification phase. And we strongly encourage the HR team not to communicate that that grace period is going to exist. Let the employees believe that the verification phase is 6 weeks, and that's it. That verification phase would also have several reminder notices going out to employees, letting those employees know that they need to complete this process and they haven't done so as yet. Anyone who has completed the process during the verification phase would also be notified. But that grace period then is sort of a hidden grace period at the back end. They can continue to come through. I would not suggest having any additional hoops that they have to jump through, but just allow them to go ahead and complete the process. Again, plenty of time to acquire documents from wherever they need to get them from. So let's talk a little bit about what do you do after you've completed the review. Well, you started off with a clean population set, and you may want to try to keep it clean. And kind of a round robin as far as through the year, you want to make sure you're checking any new hires, QLEs, anyone that's been added to the plan on a regular basis. Most of our clients choose to do this on a monthly basis, although we do have some clients that do it quarterly or biannually. You want to make sure that the system that you're going to use has the ability to do mini audits. So what I mean by mini audits is maybe we're going to take a look at a certain group. For instance, if you have spouses that are adhering to a spousal surcharge or a carve-out, you may want to have a separate audit review period such that you can then require the employees to submit an affidavit at a certain time of year verifying that their spouse does or does not have access to coverage elsewhere. Selective audits, meaning there's a merger or an acquisition, and maybe you would like to go ahead and have a separate audit done for that group prior to having them join your organization. So making sure that the system that you plan to use is flexible enough to run audits off-cycle and select groups of people in order to go back and audit, or new groups to audit as well. Considerations for success. Certainly cost and ROI are important. It's certainly going to be a selling point for your CFO. CFOs love these programs. The first thing they ask is, what's the cost and what's our gain on the back end? And it's quite substantial typically. But you also want to consider things such as the culture and the employee perception of the process. And the best way to head off any problems there is to make sure that you're communicating up front with the employees, letting them know what's coming, why it's being done, and that you're not really out on a witch hunt. We're really just trying to clean it up. We're not coming back to punish people. We just want to get it accurate and correct. And also talk about the fact that it's built-in protection for the employees themselves. A real key one, the executive support. Make sure your executive team buys on to the process and why it's being done. The last thing you want to do is have an executive walking down the hallway called out by an employee, ask what's going on with this and why are we doing it, and the executive not have an idea as to what the process is or why it's being done. Typically, executive teams are very positive about this process. They understand why it has to happen, and they also understand the protection that it provides for the organization and for the employee. And then also, again, just a little shout out to the HR team. Make sure you consider what else is going on in the organization, whether it's annual enrollment or you have all employee surveys or anything like that nature that you might want to keep in the back of your mind as you're looking at a time frame to conduct a review. So let's talk a little bit about some best practices and things to keep in the back of your mind as you're planning ahead. Communications. You want to make sure that the announcement packet of information that's going out to the employee is clear and concise. Make sure that it's addressing why this is being done. Make sure you have a good handle on how the reminder system is going to work. Is there the ability for an employee to call and ask for assistance or email someone to ask for assistance? And make sure that the timeline is well mapped out and clear as to when the employees need to complete the process. Return mail tracking. Because most packets are sent out first-class mail, any packets that are sent to a bad address are typically returned. You want to make sure your provider is tracking that and communicating back to the HR team to make certain that someone's reaching out to those employees and they don't get left behind. I would certainly say that if the provider has a way to email that packet directly to the employee supervisor or HR team member, that's a great way to get it to them quicker if for some reason they didn't receive it in the mail. Or if there's an online portal system that the employee can go on and request a packet or complete the process online, also a great point. Documentation guidelines. Make sure that the packet of information that's going out to the employee is very, very clear about what's required, what has to be returned, what documents for each dependent type are required to be submitted, and again, timeline, making sure that it's very clear as to when that's due. Accessibility. Making it easy for the employee to complete the process is key. Giving the employee the ability to fax documents into a toll-free number, upload directly to a portal, email documents, take pictures with their smartphone and send them in, send it U.S. Postal Service or UPS or any other mailing method, allowing the employee to work in whatever fashion that's easiest for them. That's really key. Process monitoring. You want to make sure that your provider gives the HR team the ability to monitor the project in real time. Some sort of portal set up so that they can track the process, see the real numbers, and understand what those numbers mean. Make sure that you're communicating back with your provider in such a fashion that you know what to expect. If you're expecting a 50% response in the first week, you're going to be deeply disappointed. So kind of having a realistic view of what to expect and when will certainly ease the stress on the HR team throughout the project. Project management. Very important to make sure that your provider gives you a direct contact with an individual who is deeply engaged in the project. They can be contacted at any time if there are any questions or concerns, but also someone is going to reach out on a weekly basis and give you an update, let you know where the project is, as opposed to where we think it should be. Are we on track? Should we be doing anything else that we're not doing currently in order to kind of help spur the numbers on a little bit? So again, all great points to consider as you're considering embarking on a dependent verification review. Quick look at a couple of case studies we've recently had, and I'll share a couple of different ones in different sizes. The first one was a small drilling company in the Midwest, about 530 dependents. Before I show you what the numbers really are, I would point out that this is a case where the HR department is somewhat disconnected. Employees were scattered all around the country. They ended up with a 20% ineligible rate, certainly one of the higher numbers that we've seen, and a fine rate of about $400,000. Second scenario would be a little bit larger organization, an auto manufacturing company, about 3,100 dependents. They hit almost dead average, 8.4%, with an annual first-year savings of about $1.13 million. Again, about the norm of what we see. And my third scenario is a two-part scenario where we actually completed an audit for a hospital group in 2012, about 12,000 dependents. We found 8.3% and about a $3.2 million savings. The client decided not to do an ongoing process and came back to us last year saying, hey, we'd like to do a cleanup audit and then pick up and do the ongoing process. We again reviewed another 6,000 dependents. They had purchased another small hospital and, of course, normal turnover rate, and we found more this time around, 11%, and another $2.2 million in first-year savings. So that kind of points out what happens over a 3-, 4-, 5-year period if you're not continuing to keep an eye on your ineligible dependents. So we do have some frequently asked questions, some of which I've covered in our conversation today, but Lee will be sending out a follow-up to some of these questions, and we can be more than happy to respond to additional questions that you might have. We're running a little close on time, so what I'd like to do is plug my email address in there. If I can be of any assistance to you, by all means, please reach out to me and ask away. We'll be more than happy to answer your questions. And we really appreciate you spending the time with us this afternoon and look forward to talking with you in the future.
And Mark, we had a couple of really good questions come through. Just wanted to throw them out there since we've got a couple of extra minutes. We've got one that says, why not announce a dependent audit during the fourth quarter open enrollment or whenever your open enrollment is? and say, if you drop your ineligible dependents now, you'll have no consequences and you won't have to deal with the audit. Would that help get results? Would that impact an audit in Q1? What's your thought process around that strategy?
That's a good point. Certainly communicating prior to the annual audit period that you are going to be checking will help. Oddly enough, we've done several projects that way and still find a pretty sizable number of ineligible dependents on the back end. The fact that you haven't checked in the past, they probably think that might be a bluff, or people still, again, just don't understand what the rules are. But certainly a good plan. Individuals, most employees are probably still going to be reviewed, because if they have one ineligible dependent, they probably have 2 or 3 other eligible dependents. So it doesn't really save a whole lot, but it could, and it'd certainly be a good way to start.
Great. And I think we've got time for one more, and then as Mark said, we are definitely compiling all of these, and we'll send out a list to folks after the webinar. So thank you for the great questions we've had. One of the other questions was, is there any risk to ineligible dependents misusing the plan during the project period? So leading up to the removal, is there a risk for folks misusing it, and then how do you mitigate that risk?
Great question. The standard wording for our package that we send out, the announcement letter, basically states any claims filed after the date of this announcement letter for ineligible dependents may be, again, it's kind of a veiled threat, but may be the responsibility of the employee. So you do have the option to come back and say, hey, you were sent an announcement package on February 1st, and you filed a claim for your brother's kids on March the 1st, and went out and had that knee surgery and all of the physicals done before they were dropped. So we're going to send that bill back to you, and we're going to decline to pay it. So great question. The best way to head that off is to make sure that the verbiage in the announcement letter states that those claims could be the responsibility of the employee.
Great. And I'm going to throw one more at you. And then, guys, I did want to let you know we will be sending out a copy of the presentation as well as a recording as well with those questions. So look for that. But, Mark, just one more. How many reminders would you recommend sending out before you remove an ineligible dependent for noncompliance?
Great question. Again, looking at how we have built our process, and we've changed it over the years and worked different time frames and different number of reminders, we have found it optimal to be using an announcement packet, the first and second reminder in the 3rd and the 5th week. And our reminders go out in 2 fashions. We send out a reminder card, and if we have an email address for that employee in the system, we send an email as well. We send both. We don't rely only on email, because a lot of times those emails end up in a spam box. Then an appeal letter, we call it, but it's really not the appeal, of course, but just basically a highlight letter that says this is where you currently stand, and then a final determination on the back end. So if you count that up, that's 5 different communications that would go out to someone who has an ineligible dependent on the very back end of the audit. And I think that's important to know that after that many communications go out, it's kind of hard to say, I didn't know this was happening. We also find that a lot of the HR teams will use reports from our system, which they can sort by department, location code, manager's name, whatever information they give us in the census feed, and then they'll communicate back out to leadership and say, here's a list of all your employees who have not completed the process or have not communicated with the vendor. They may want to make sure they reach out and get this taken care of. So internal assistance from HR certainly helps a lot. It's not dependent on that for the process to take place, but that does help a lot. Great question.
Thanks, Mark. So I think what I'm hearing here is, this is really important that the employees are communicated to well, that, we're making sure that they feel comfortable with the process, and there's really a lot of consideration for the culture, around this process. So thanks for going through that. So, as I mentioned, folks, we will be sending out a recording as well as the slides and the answers to the rest of these questions that we've got. Mark's email, again, is up on screen, so please feel free to reach out to him as well directly with any questions. And we thank you for your time today. I hope you have a great day.